This is in theory.
The ideology of faculty.
Let's begin by talking about political ideology. This is Americans' ideological views by year, and once again, it's Gallup. Conservative, liberal, and moderate. Moderates are 35% here, and they're 43% here. Now, we're running this from Clinton into the current election that had Trump and Biden. I'll put T and B. Conservatives are this green line. They're at 36, and they end up at 36. You'll notice that in 1992, only 17% of the country would self-describe as liberal. From 2020, this line is moving a little bit, and it ends up here at 25. What we're seeing is the emergence of three equal publics. You notice that if the liberal situation is gaining ground, it seems to be at the expense of the moderates.
You are listening to In Theory.
Let's talk a little bit about faculty. There's an interesting survey that goes on. Undergraduate teaching faculty, they do this every year. This is what the survey looks like. This is 1990. This is 2014, which is now starting to get old, but I have current data, which I'll show you in a second. In 1990, we have college professors coming in at about 40. And by 2014, there appears to be a very large uptick in professors who are self-identifying as being on the left. Conservatives are having a slight drop-off from 20% to, about 12%. And it's the moderates who are also experiencing pretty significant decline. Here's more recent data, 2017. Remember, this is going out now to 2017. We're seeing very similar numbers. These proportions mirror the proportions in previous parts of the survey. Now, let me ask you, is this a problem? Is it a problem if the country has a certain ideological predisposition and the faculty have much different ideological predisposition? Is that a problem? What we're really asking you, is this a problem? And then what we're asking you, is this a problem? And what would you say?
You are listening to In Theory.
That's like the military. They're probably a little more Republican, I assume, but they're not. They're trying to do their jobs. So can we apply that to the professors? Is it the same logic? Look, it doesn't matter. We're just doing our jobs. What would you say about that? If the academy embraces epistemology before it does politics, there would be no theoretical problem. There's this concept called epistemology. It's a word that's borrowed from philosophy. As a general rule, what it means is proof, grounds, evidence, justification. That premises have justification, they have support. What we are supposed to believe in as a college professor is truth before anything else. We're supposed to be a proof and truth-based organization. That's what science is. Even though we indulge in perspective, like philosophers, think of philosophers. Philosophy is not a science, right? But it indulges in perspective, the grounds for premises, the ways of seeing, the way that beliefs come to be imagined, the proof that's there. And we critique these things. And we ask you to do the same thing. Critique, grounds, proof, logic. This is all what we're supposed to be primarily devoted to in the first instance. A rough word for that is epistemology, grounds. If the academy embraces epistemology before it does politics, there would be no theoretical problem. Professors should like ideas first. There is no reason a liberal professor could not credibly and effectively teach you supply-side economics. Philosophy professors do this all the time. Philosophy professors are known for teaching things they don't believe in. They teach how the ideas work. So, I could teach you supply-side economics, and I could teach you Marxism equally competently. And I could easily do that. So if professors are beholden first and foremost to truth, grounds, premises, rival accounts, rival beliefs, before they're for activation, outcome, and power, there's not theoretically a problem.
You are listening to In Theory.
What am I saying to you? This is primary and this is secondary. That's the way it should be. So if I'm an intellectual, I will do this at my job and do this elsewhere, which may involve students. That's okay. We teach students to get involved. We show them things. Some people develop opinions. Some of the students want to be liberal. Good. Perfectly fine. Some want to be conservative. That's fine too. And so there is this dimension here that is allowed. It's just that it's secondary. And so long as the academy functions like that, then there wouldn't be any theoretical problem. However, the danger comes about if the academy is becoming postmodern. This term would mean that it no longer believes in critical reasoning and analytical philosophy, should those things obstruct desired political objectives. If the academy becomes sort of postmodern, this becomes primary and this becomes secondary, so that these things become truth, and these things just become instrumentation, rhetoric. That's a problem. If the academy ever becomes a postmodern world where power is more important than truth.
You are listening to In Theory.
Another issue is what ideology itself is. If all that it is just political perception, differences of opinion about the good life, that is one thing. But if it is taken as one side being the better people and the other side being a social danger, then there could develop a very interesting little problem. Most disputes about politics in America, at least the ones that recur, occupy a lot of the time in the campaigns, really are disputes about how much individualism should be in public policy versus how much communitarian sentiment should be in public policy. This is usually more on the left, this is more on the right, if we put a continuum here. Most disputes that are like this simply involve our political perceptions, our views about what we think is the best way to configure a state. Those people who tend to believe in more individualistic public policy are less receptive to democratic socialism and the things that Bernie and more of the leftist Democrats want to do. Those who are much more into this want to go in that direction. So much of that is just political perception. Much of that is innocent. To some extent, it's political philosophy. You know, I'm conservative, you're liberal, or vice versa. We just have a reasonable dispute about how to configure public policy. That's why we have the elections. So if that's all that political ideology is, there's nothing wrong with that. But if it starts to be perceived as something else, then a problem could emerge.
You are listening to In Theory.
There was a conservative by the name of Pat Buchanan. This guy's a little bit controversial. I don't want to get into his controversial side. But what I do want to say is that I remember an interview with him, I think it was in the 1990s. This guy's been around for a long time. And I couldn't find that interview. I looked for it on Google. I wanted to show it to you. But somebody once asked him about the liberal academy and how liberal college professors have always outnumbered conservatives. One thing, if you talk to conservatives, today's conservatives, I don't know, sometimes if you listen to these conservative outlets, these people will talk as though they're under siege, that the people in the college professors and bringing these weird ideas are trying to transform the students into these activists and aren't teaching the truth and so forth. I want to tell you point blank, that is a modern phenomenon, a modern complaint that's happening now. What I want you to contrast it with is what it was like in the 1990s and the 1980s. If you would talk to conservative people in the 1980s and 1990s about liberal professors, this view here that Pat Buchanan expressed is what they would say. They would say, what college is doing is making me a better conservative. I have to know my way around all these arguments. That's what they were saying. Pat Buchanan and these guys would say that, look, they're not changing anyone. You saw the surveys. I showed you the surveys. Only 17% of the country said they were liberal, but yet the college professors were about 50%. And so these guys would say, they're not making conservatives out of anyone. They're just making us smarter. That's what they would say before we got into this era here. And again, that would be when these values look something like that.
This is In Theory.
The one thing I will tell you, I'm going to go ahead and throw my own opinion in here. I don't ever recall college not having more liberal professors than conservative. I don't ever remember that. You know, when I was going to college, there was only one conservative in our department. Everybody else was Democrat, everybody else was liberal. But there was a difference back then in the 1980s. There was absolutely no mistaking that these professors were very much into epistemology first. And they loved debates, they loved critiquing things, and they didn't mind if you were conservative because they understood that to be about political perception on what is the good state. You're allowed to be conservative. Nobody cares. Well, we want you involved in the arguments, in the critique, and doing that sort of thing. And we have votes. Whoever wins the election, then we have public policy more in one direction than the other. That's what they believed in. So there was no threat at all. In fact, there was a kind of respect for that thing.
You are listening to In Theory.
Now, one of the things we do have to mention is that business colleges usually have more conservative professors. You know, if you want to know where the conservative professors are and where they have a majority in the academy, it's in the business schools. I don't know how relevant this is, but at our university, the faculty in COLA tend to be pretty liberal. And the business college people are different. And this actually played out a little bit when Wright State had its strike, because a lot of the people who wouldn't go on strike were in the business college. But anyway, I don't know if that really means anything. In terms of addressing faculty politics and public policy, it's maybe an interesting little footnote.